Prior to 1975, the Republic of Lebanon operated as a tiny, multi-religious entity carved out by the French mandatory power. This framework gave the Maronite Christian community the dominant role in governing a fragile demographic balance. During the mid-20th century, Lebanon's thriving commerce and relative stability earned it a reputation as the Switzerland of the Middle East. But that prosperity masked deep, festering sectarian fissures and a central government that was steadily losing its grip on the country. The system was pushed past its breaking point in 1969. Following their ejection from Jordan, Palestinian militias relocated to Lebanon. Under the leadership of figures like Yasser Arafat, they brought an estimated 8,000 well-trained fighters into the country. These militias operated like cuckoos in a nest. They were comparatively well-armed, highly organized, and demanded operational autonomy to use Lebanese territory as a springboard for strikes into Israel. Their presence severely disrupted the delicate demographic and power-sharing balance of the Lebanese state. To prevent total collapse, Prime Minister Karami formed a fragile rescue cabinet of 6 deputies, 2 Muslims, 1 Druze, and 3 Christians. But outside, Kamal Jumblat's National Struggle Front absorbed left-wing groups and communists, solidifying into a highly polarized Muslim coalition. Injecting tens of thousands of heavily armed foreign paramilitaries into a politically paralyzed, highly factionalized republic guaranteed a violent collision. The state's monopoly on violence was evaporating. The nominal peace fractured entirely in August 1975. It began with a localized dispute in a Saleh cafe that left a Muslim dead, immediately triggering armed clashes between the local Greek Catholic residents and a nearby Shia militia. 2 days later, a Fatah officer was killed in an alleged Falangist ambush on an ambulance. The fighting intensified instantly. Within days, over 50 people were dead. Kidnapping surged, and armed militias erected physical barricades, cutting off the route between the city and the airport. By late 1975, the combat had moved into the heart of Beirut's commercial district, escalating into what became known as the Battle of the Hotels. The high-rises provided vital tactical oversight of the city. Ibrahim Khalif commanded a coalition of the Morabitoun and the Syrian-backed Saika forces, launching a grinding assault to dislodge the Falangist Christian militias entrenched inside the hotel buildings. To break the stalemate, Muslim militias introduced heavier urban warfare technology. They brought Soviet rocket-propelled grenades and 106mm recoilless rifles mounted on vehicles directly into the city streets. The fighting became a brutal territorial seesaw. By mid-December, Muslim forces successfully seized the disputed Phoenicia Hotel and held desperately onto the Alcazar, while the Christians managed to maintain a firm grip on their main base at the Holiday Inn. Heavy artillery duels in the capital's premier tourist district proved the central government was completely powerless to intervene. The state's authority had been replaced by heavily armed warlordism. Recognizing the failure of the central state, the Lebanese front began pressing for formal geographic partition. They established a degree of autonomy in their own hinterland north of Beirut, going so far as to construct their own airport at Halat to bypass the contested capital entirely. The National Democratic Movement fiercely rejected this political decentralization. They published a 7-point plan opposing the divide, viewing the Christian partition as a deliberate mechanism to strip Lebanon of its Arab identity. Economic realities rapidly undermined these ambitions. The 1984 collapse saw a $300 million tax deficit, a free-falling pound, and 25% unemployment. Expanding the data reveals the physical toll, infrastructural damage exceeding $4 billion and 600,000 displaced citizens. While the formal economy disintegrated, the Palestinian refugee camps became heavily militarized focal points. However, the Palestinian militias were not a solid bloc. They fractured violently into hostile coalitions, those supporting Yasser Arafat's political approach, and Syrian-backed rejectionists insisting that Palestinian independence required continuous armed struggle. With the state bankrupt and the professional class fleeing the country, militia warfare and foreign military patronage effectively became the only viable industries left for national survival. To the south, a different power center was mobilizing. The southern part of Lebanon was inhabited primarily by Shia Muslims, numbering around 900,000, the largest yet historically poorest and most depressed sect in the country. Guided by Iranian-backed clerics like Imam Musa Sadr, religious and ideological leadership organized the Shia into a formidable political and military bloc, eventually coalescing under Nabi Berri to form the Amal militia. Under Berri's leadership, Amal aggressively pursued a policy of Lebanon for the Lebanese. To enforce this, his militia fought simultaneously against invading Palestinians, Syrians, and even Iranian revolutionary guards to expel foreign armed groups from their territory. By December 1984, the sheer scale of the chaos was visible across multiple concurrent flashpoints. In the north, the Lebanese Army's 2nd Brigade moved into Tripoli to dismantle barricades after fighting between Sunni and Alawite militias. Simultaneously, a car bomb in Ali provoked artillery attacks on East Beirut, and Druze and Lebanese army units clashed at Souk al-Garb, while an Israeli armored column crossed north over the Awali River to intervene, before eventually withdrawing. The conflict was no longer a two-sided civil war. It was a gridlocked chessboard of overlapping, highly localized foreign proxy wars. The internationalization of the conflict invited deeper blowback. In early 1985, a covert CIA-trained unit was formed to counter Hezbollah's rising international terrorism campaign. On March 8th, this Lebanese unit detonated a massive car bomb outside the Beirut home of Hezbollah leader Sheikh Fadlallah. The blast killed at least 60 people and injured over 200. But Fadlallah was not at home. Hezbollah's response was immediate. 2 days later, a suicide bomber drove an explosive-laden truck into an Israeli military convoy in Metula, killing 9 soldiers. While foreign proxies traded bombings, the internal factions were cannibalizing themselves. Within the Christian bloc, Lebanese Forces commander Samir Giaga fiercely protested President Amin Gemayel's pro-Syrian policies. Giaga refused to hand over checkpoints, leading to his formal expulsion, triggering immediate fratricidal armed clashes across East Beirut and the Metin Hills between Giaga's loyalists and the official Phalange line. The internal split rapidly widened into a complete strategic disaster. Giaga's militia launched an intense artillery bombardment on Sidon, provoking a massive counterattack from an allied group of Muslim militias. The advancing Muslim forces looted abandoned homes, driving 60,000 Christian refugees to flee toward Jazin. Internal fratricide was ultimately deadlier to the factional blocs than their ideological enemies. The original binary of Christian versus Muslim had dissolved into a chaotic war of all against all. Admitting his government was practically defunct, Prime Minister Karami formally invited Syrian troops back into Lebanon in July 1985 to restore order to the dead state. Syrian military observers arrived to supervise weapons collection. A joint task force, including the Lebanese 6th Brigade, swept through West Beirut, clearing militia flags, dismantling barriers at the American University, and shutting down militia offices. Yet this pacification contained a stark geopolitical duality. In the exact same month Syria cleansed the capital of weapons, Damascus quietly handed over 40 Soviet tanks to the Amal militia. Political reconciliation failed entirely at talks in Shtoura. A newly formed National Unity Front led by Berri and Jumblat demanded an absolute end to the existing Lebanese sectarian power-sharing arrangements, ensuring the gridlock continued. The stalemate devolved into a wave of reciprocal car bombings aimed at ethnically cleansing neighborhoods. In August, a bomb in a Christian district killed 15. A similar explosion days later killed 55. The Christians retaliated by exploding car bombs in Muslim areas, with responsibility claimed by the Black Brigades. The Syrian intervention initially failed to halt the bloodshed because its true purpose was to manage and manipulate the warring factions, not to permanently disarm them. The conflict ground towards its conclusion in October 1990. To implement the Taif Accords and establish a new political reality, one major obstacle had to be eradicated by force: General Michel Aoun's independent Christian enclave. Aoun was completely isolated. The armed forces converging on his position included a massive deployment of Syrian troops: General Antoine Lahoud's section of the Lebanese army, Samir Giaga's Lebanese forces, and Eli Hobeka's phalangists. The decisive battle commenced early on October 13, 1990. Syrian aviation launched a massive aerial attack directly on the Babda presidential palace and the adjacent military complex, followed by continuous heavy artillery barrages. The independent Christian resistance collapsed entirely. Within an hour, under withering fire from all sides, General Own fled to seek political asylum in the French embassy. The Maronites had lost most of their historical dominance in the Civil War. Their political survival was ultimately guaranteed only because Syrian President Hafez al-Assad required a unified Lebanon, fearing that a shattered state would spill factional violence over his own borders. The Sunni Muslims remained politically influential, exercising power through the office of prime minister, but they were largely sidelined militarily. Conversely, the Shias had evolved from a marginalized demographic into a permanent military powerhouse, demanding a systemic overhaul of the state. The Jumblat dynasty, which had spent the war violently pursuing anti-Maronite ambitions and local autonomy, found its goals firmly capped by the overwhelming imposition of Syrian hegemony. Lebanon managed to survive as a political entity, but it did not achieve peace through internal reconciliation. Instead, the factions bled themselves and their infrastructure so dry that surrendering to foreign subjugation became the only alternative to total annihilation.